This is the culture.
Welcome, it's Vinny Albano, and welcome to Vinny's Mini Reviews. The Killer, directed by David Fincher, written by Andrew Kevin Walker of Seven fame, based on the graphic novel by Alexei Nollet, has arrived to Netflix this past weekend, and there's a lot to talk about here because David Fincher obviously has become one of the most influential film directors of our generation and is easily one of the most creative and talented directors. However, he comes to us on Netflix with The Killer, a solid genre piece, but is it anything more than just that? From the first 15 minutes alone, you can tell if you're going to love it or if you're going to hate it. The Killer opens up with this extended stakeout in Paris following Michael Fassbender's character, who is just simply called The Killer. And it's paired with this lengthy first person voiceover that just it goes on and on about skepticism and nihilism and all these whatnots. He mentions McDonald's and how you can there's nowhere else where you can get, I believe, 15 grams of protein for €3, or it might have been €1. People may find this really annoying, and I can understand why. It is definitely an interesting take into a mindset of a person that people don't like to associate with. However, I thought it was great. I think it's an excellent show of sleek, precise filmmaking and character. I think Andrew Kevin Walker, the screenwriter, like I mentioned, takes the source material and just adapts it in a very natural, clean way. And I think the simplicity of the film and how solid of a genre piece it really is, which we'll get back to, is a double-edged sword because it does really add to the film. And I think sometimes you don't need a 3 hour long epic with high stakes. Sometimes a filmmaker like David Fincher can just take a quick, an hour and 40-minute film genre piece and just put some really well executed filmmaking into it and just have a fun time. I use fun lightly in the context of this film, obviously, as we're following a psychopath. But it's just clean, and sometimes films can just be solid little bite-sized genre pieces. However, like I mentioned, it's a double-edged sword because it hinders the film. Fincher is an incredible director with one of the best filmographies we've ever seen. Seven, Fight Club, Gone Girl, Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. It just goes on and on and on. And all his films remain these groundbreaking pieces in film. The Killer is just really a genre piece at the end of the day. And it plays into tropes, and it plays into those tropes excellently. These tropes are done in a very, like I mentioned, in David Fincher's classic, clean, precise style. And they're incredibly well executed with some incredible tension. But it doesn't escalate the film to a higher echelon like his other films in his filmography. The Killer, however, there is, like I mentioned, a lot to take from it. Even though it does play into tropes, it does it well. And there's some really tension, nail biting scenes. Like I mentioned, the first 15 minutes in Paris are great. It's following a character. It's really getting into his head. If you like it or if you don't, I thought it is absolutely fascinating to be there with him. Every thought that he has. However, although the character isn't that emotionally developed throughout the film. We are casted onto his path of revenge, although we didn't really see any emotional foundation on why this person, who I assume is his wife, uh, is important in his home life and why he has such an emotional connection to this person to go on this path of revenge. Uh, it does set up our character as a contradictory character. He preaches a mantra of no empathy and this really sociopath skeptic mindset. However, he's on a path of revenge. That alone is a path that you require empathy for. Uh, if he clearly has no empathy, then why is he going out of his way, breaking his mantra, breaking his philosophy for someone he loves? But I think that's what makes it really fascinating, because the storytelling in this film is very implicit. It's not straight up told to you in an explicit format. A lot of his development is shrouded in this like cloud, this persona he puts on, but he's not really that. And we find that out in the end, where we see him throughout the film abandon his mantra many times. For example, when he barges into the restaurant to confront Tilda Swinton's character, the expert. Excellent tension building scene, by the way. A classic use of, as Alfred Hitchcock says, the bomb under the table suspense builder. Or when he fights the brute, he just cast away his Fitbit even though his heart rate was extremely high, and we see the consequences he suffers for that because he gets a beating. In the end, how he spares Claiborne's life, because in my opinion, I see that as him seeing himself in Claiborne, which in essence is him gaining empathy for Claiborne. Claiborne was just doing exactly what he was preaching the entire film. He's cleaning up after his selfish actions, and he is reminiscent of the killer's mantra, and that's why he just spares him at the end, leaves him with a little threat, check out, maybe there's a little bit of radiation on the lip of your favorite coffee mug or whatnot, or you might have a tragic accident in getting up the elevator or getting in the elevator of your building. But he goes back to Dominican Republic and he mentions, I am just one of the many. However, in the beginning of the film, he says he's one of the few. He's one of this pretentious few that, he has no empathy and yada yada. But he's really just like us. I think this element of having a contradictory character is what makes the film so fascinating and what elevates it from genre piece to a very solid genre piece. Some other notes about The Killer: it felt very video game vibe at times. It felt like the Hitman games. Obviously, Fincher is a big fan of digital elements in film, and he uses digital cinematography to the best of his advantage. From its opening credits as well, its title cards from chapter to chapter, its VFX, and obviously Trent Reznor, a longtime collaborator of Fincher, his electronic sounding score, and also just the use of technology in the film, how the killer uses Amazon and these other corporate and targeting Claiborne, an economic man himself. It's felt very video game, and some may like that, some may not, but it was definitely something I noticed. Tilda Swinton, going back to her scene, she commands the scene. She's great. Like it, she's not introduced until the beginning of the scene, and then throughout it, she just takes over. She's fascinating, and like I mentioned, it's a classic use of the gun under the table, bomb under the table, suspense builder. You don't know what she's going to do, but she is the expert. So you know whatever she's going to do is going to be cold and calculated. She ends up slipping on the stairs, and I it's predictable. I'm not gonna lie, and I think that's where the film then begins to hinder, is because you have this really tension biting scene, and then you end it with something like, yeah, you knew she was gonna have a knife on her or some shit like that. But it's the killer is solid all around. Also, the Smiths. I'm a big Smiths fan. I love the use of the Smiths in this film. Definitely not saying, or the film is definitely not trying to say that we are all psychopathic Smiths fans, but love the use of the Smiths in this film. It's killer, man. However, the film also, I do I do compliment David Fincher's use of digital elements in the film, just all around, taking filmmaking and the evolution of filmmaking and using it to its advantage. However, I can't lie, there are some scenes that look really weird. VFX on the Molotov looked hella weird. The fight with the Brute, amazing choreographed fight, super brutal, super intense. Not gonna lie, I don't know if it was just me or the TV I was watching it on. It did look like it was being shot at like a higher frame rate. There were some weird blurs going on, probably the TV I was watching. But also, this is the most handheld I've ever seen in a Fincher film. I know Fincher, he is pretty strays away from handheld. There's some few instances like in Seven, the last scene, or in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, there's like one scene with handheld. This film has handheld all throughout. But it's a little weird because I have a feeling that some of these handhelds were like digital handhelds. You can see the camera's on a dolly, and it's moving. The dolly's moving, but it's still shaking. It looked a little weird. However, I do think it adds to that intensity. And I like to see that David Fincher is going into new techniques. He's trying some new things out. The Killer was solid all around. Just solid genre piece. Although, like I said, it's simple in nature, and I think it doesn't have to be complex to be good. It doesn't have to be this big thing. However, that does hinder the film from going into Fincher's higher echelon of a filmography, or it does hinder the film from being some of David Fincher's best. I give The Killer a solid 7.5 out of 10. I think it's a great, enjoyable film. But does it stand up to something like Seven or Fight Club or his other works? Definitely not. But I think as a great example of some sleek, precise digital filmmaking, it's up there. That's The Killer.